Salutations, friends, and welcome back to Research Paper. But first, there's been a lot of information that has been brought to our attention. Wowzas. 911 call, text between Dylan and Bethany. And it's all... And this was done by the state, Ashley Jennings. And it was redacted so we get to see it, which I find interesting because this is the state, and why wouldn't they want that information out? As you can see, we'll look into that. But specifically, we're going to just look at a few things that pertain to this channel. One is the 911 call, and two is the text exchange between Bethany and Dylan of Bethany saying, Xana is wearing all black, which that's the first thing she says that she finds the need to tell Dylan, which is odd because here is Xana wearing all black with Bethany. And we mentioned this on this channel with the color of psychology. There could be many reasons why that alerted her. It could just be simply, yes, she wore that earlier in the day. She changed when she went to the party at Sigma Chi. And maybe she put them back on afterwards. Who knows? But for Bethany to say that is quite odd. And that we mentioned it here on this channel. So let's take a look. Here. And this started, so this is November 13th at 2:10 a.m. Dylan texts the Uber driver, which is strange. Is she looking for a ride? Because in the PCA, it says that she's home. But of course, the state is like, we're not going to worry about why. We're just showing a timeline. They're just showing that she was awake texting. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to worry about this. So then from 4:19 to 4:21, Dylan attempts to call everyone except for Ethan. And since no one called, she goes to texting. So she texts Bethany, and she says, no one is answering. And bitch, why didn't you answer my phone call? No. But why is no one answering? And I'm really confused. So Bethany just says, yeah, dude, what the hell's going on? And then she says, Xana is wearing all black, which, okay. Now in the PCA, where is it? Oh boy. My computer's going to give me problems. It's been acting funny lately. Let's see here. So, Dylan and Bethany made statements that everyone was home at 2 a.m. And they were at least asleep or in the rooms by 4, with the exception of Kernodle, who received a DoorDash at approximately 4 a.m. Okay. So this is around 4 a.m., 4:22 to 4:24, and that's when she says Xana's wearing all black. So when did she see her? As well as now Dylan is saying, I'm freaking out right now. No, it's like a ski mask almost. And Bethany is like, STFU. Actually, meaning I'm not kidding. And Dylan says, like, he had something over his, I'm going to say forehead and little on the mouth. I'm not kidding, am so freaked out. So I'm thinking it's more of like this, like a ski mask, like a ski mask. But then in the PCA, for whatever reason, let's see here. She opened her door, Dylan, a second time, and she heard what she thought was crying from Cornoto's room. So this is 417. That they heard some distorted audio and a loud thud, and a dog can be heard barking numerous times at 417. And then DM said she stated she opened her door for the third time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. So they're going by the interviews, but that was the most prominent thought in Dylan was it was like a ski mask. And that really alerted her. This sounds more like a COVID mask. So, and we'll get into this. I'll do definitely more on this, but I want to move forward to the 911 call, which on this channel, when the Fraternity and Sorority video, I showed clips that were on national news about them covering these hazing deaths and the 911 calls that were recorded to show that what they say was not going with was actually what was going on. So here in yellow is Emily, who lives in that complex that's to the right of 1122, where they had that picture the day of 11/12, which we just looked at. So she says, one of the roommates who passed out and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up. Who's passed out and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up. So that is what they are taught to say in the Greek system when there is an incident like this. And I've also researched these sorority and fraternity houses, like their actual national homepage, and they do address this. So we'll get into that further on. But with this research paper, we're going to see it kind of ties in nicely of what we have discussed already and that what we're going to discuss in the future. Because in the timeline, dynamics, and connections, I'm going to go back further into Greek because there's an earlier connection into their university sorority connection. So that has me also thinking, is Emily like one of those representatives who you call to come over in a situation like this? Is a possibility. But what's strange about this 911 call is no mention of Ethan's body at all. Only Xana. And that she just looked passed out, which we'll get into a different time. We're just going to address the Ethan. So they did not mention Ethan at all. Just Xana. And here in the PCA, So they go to the second floor. Later learned it was Xana's room because of her driver's license and personal belongings that were found in the room. And she was later identified as Kernodle. She was lying on the floor. She was deceased with wounds which appear to have been caused by an edged weapon, which apparently the roommates, it was not apparent to them. Unless it's because they have to say that she was drinking last night and she's not waking up. But we don't know. It is very strange and odd. But what I find interesting is that also in the room was a male, later identified as Ethan Chapin. Hereafter, Chapin was also deceased with wounds later determined, which is a misspelling there, provided by Spokane County, and it's redacted. Spokane County Medical Examiner on December 15th to be caused by sharp force. And then this is not here. So was even Ethan there? Because the roommates don't address Ethan and that he's even there. And now we don't even know where Ethan is located in the room. But they definitely let us know where Xana is, as well as Morgan and Kaylee. Two females in the single bed in the room. So all three are located within the room at a specific location, but not Ethan. This is a mess. There's a lot going on. There is a lot going on. And it does not look good. And then owlate the sheath. So now we find out that Maddie has 3 unidentified male, I want to say male DNA, I could be wrong, but definitely 3 unidentified DNA that does not connect Brian Koberger to those, which we were saying from the beginning, if these people had defensive wounds, what about the fingernails? And that came out. And I believe I did read that they did not swab the knife sheath for any type of fluids, any type of bodily fluids. So here on this channel, we went over from the forensic textbook that you have to identify the weapon. Well, it's not even the weapon, it's a sheath, to the victims to prove that it was there at the time of the incident. So there's no swabbing of that to connect the weapon to the victims. So that's that. So I'll definitely do more with this, but that is just what I have done so far. So let's get back to some sanity here of this research paper. Goodness gracious. So here is, and I felt pretty minty after all this, so this is mint. Peer victimization in college sorority and fraternity students, the impact of group identity and campus connectedness, by Julia Jacqueline Michael. And you know what, Julia? Thank you for doing this amazing thesis. I have seen other theses, but this one I definitely wanted to use. It's a dissertation submitted to the faculty of the Department of Disability and Psychoeducational Studies in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a major in school psychology in the Graduate College the University of Arizona. And here are the 2 portals that you can go to get this information. And my school, the university I went to for my criminal justice, has this ProQuest, which one of the benefits is you have access to their library. Not Google, like if you're listening to the Karen Reed case, where the judge said, is that a Google from Alessi? Do you think Alessi uses Google? No. No, he does not. He's a professional. Apparently the non-professionals, and I hate to say it like this, but it's as though the prosecution, and Alessi brought this up. I want to say Alessi or Jackson. Actually, it was Jackson when he says, these officers are part of the prosecution. It's all one group. They're all together. The judge, the prosecutors, and the officers. They all are one entity. They're not separate. They're one entity. So you all need to know what is going on. Which alerted me, thinking these types are those types that never kept their eyes on their own paper when they were in school, and they never grew out of that. They never kept their eyes on their own paper. I have a feeling from just listening to Mr. Brennan, he's smart enough to hear the words that Alessi uses, like conscientious, and other words he's heard probably on YouTube about like integrity and ethics, but he's smart enough to hear those words, but not smart enough to apply them properly in regards to that officer that had said very terrible things, or had someone under his watch that was not conscientious, had no integrity, and was not ethical. So you can't, smart to hear the words, but not smart enough to apply them properly. It's like these were the kids that cheated on their tests in middle school throughout high school. They knew they had siblings who were older that kept their test, and they memorized the answers, and they do some crazy things, which I have experienced and witnessed, not so much experienced, but witnessed. They tap their pencil, or they do a little stomp, something like that. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I would say like towards the end of my middle school years, I would eyeball once in a while. And then I made a conscious choice to be like, I can't do this. Like, just learn the material. And once I made that conscious decision, then I was able to articulate, how do you study? Like, how are you able to, I asked smart people, how are you able to do this? And they were my friends. I had very smart friends, way smarter than me. But I would also ask teachers, like, how do you study for a test? And people taught me how to outline, or look at the key words, look at the back of the chapter, at the summary. But it seems like these people never learned how to not keep their eyes on their own paper. So here is the table of contents. We'll get back to work here. We'll definitely do the introduction. We'll definitely look at chapter 2. We won't go too deep into it because it's a long thesis. We won't go through the methodology, but if you don't pick anything up on this research paper, but if you just pick up on this, I'd be happy. This is what a proper methodology looks like, not what Mr. Brennan is trying to peddle of his expert. And that Alessi definitely showed he did not have a methodology. So this is what a methodology should look like. A proper study population, a study of participants, and then her measures, interventions, peer victimization questionnaire, a social connectedness scale, campus version, so in the right milieu. Depression, anxiety, stress scales, 21 item short form, social identity scale. So she has this is how she gathers her information in order to do her procedure and get her statistical analysis, which then she's able to make her hypothesis. See that? She's got her sample size, population, the participants. She gathers all of her information and then applies a procedure to it, which then she can do her statistical analysis with her hypothesis. And she's got 4 of them. We will look at some of the results, but mostly here on this, we'll look at the conclusion because it's a lot of information, a lot of good information, but we don't have to go through every detail. We're doing this to get an understanding, an overview. So let's go with the abstract. Let's go. Abstract. So this study examined peer victimization, specifically indirect peer victimization and cyber victimization, which I did see some of that in the sororities, some light, in a sample of 311 college fraternity and sorority students at a large public university in the southwestern United States. So she has her specificities here, specifically. One specific focus was the relationship between peer victimization, both within the fraternities and sorority groups and between fraternity and sorority groups and outside members, and co-occurring psychological stress such as anxiety, depression, and stress. So she has her sample and it's specific, and then she has possible underlying causes of why the victimization occurs. So those are her variables of the underlying causes of the victimization. So it has a cause and an effect. The potential mediating roles of group identity and campus connectedness were also examined. So then she has an intervention that will help lessen or help improve the victimization. This study utilized the social psychology theory of social identity theory to predict the relationships between the aforementioned variables. Results indicated that a majority of college fraternity and sorority students, 58%, had experienced at least one instance of indirect peer victimizations since being initiated into their respective organization. Collectively, the majority of respondents reported low levels of peer victimization and high levels of group identity and campus connectedness. So here, like with Maisie and Hunter, after that had happened, they went back to campus into their groups because they have a high group identity. And with the fraternities and the sororities, part of being together in a group is they go to game day. So they have a connectedness to the University of Game Day, amongst others, but that's one of the major ones. So because they have a high level of group identity, more than likely is reported low levels of peer victimization. Okay. As hypothesized, peer victimization was significantly and positively correlated with stress, which makes sense. And I could see that within the fraternity Sigma Chi specifically on their grades. You can see that it was very important to have high GPA. And it's been known that Ethan did not take his studies very seriously, and that's per his mom. So would he get some peer victimization because of the stress that was felt on their GPA scores? In addition, higher ratings of within group peer victimization were related to lower ratings of group identity. However, there you go. High ratings of within group peer victimization were related to low ratings of group identity. So what if they didn't go back? Hunter and Maisie. However, ratings of between group peer victimization were not significantly related to ratings of group identity, which did not support the hypothesis that there would be a significant and positive correlation between the two. So this is like, you see how they do interact a lot between the groups, different houses on both sides, fraternity and sorority, and then you have them coinciding together, doing their socials, having their balls, so on and so forth. So there's not that automatic, well, this is our house and this is their house. But when stress is applied, that changes, and she will show that. So I had mentioned how Kaylee was in a in a Pi Phi home, and she's Alpha Phi, which to this thesis, that is not a big deal. But Kaylee was no longer in a home, or no longer a member, as well as Maddie. And we heard Zaina as well. So she gets into that in this. And I did find 2 articles that talked about the students, what their relation was to the sororities. And there's 2 different articles that say 2 different things. One is an interview of a member of Pi Phi, but the source is Daily Mail. So it's unfortunate with this case, with the amount of, I hate to say it, disinformation from law enforcement and the university, which is not good. These are professionals. These are adults. It was also found that campus connectedness mediated the relationship between peer victimization and stress, which makes sense. You have professors that you can connect to or talk to, counselors, coaches. Specifically, campus connectedness served as a protective factor from stress. But group identity did not protect against stress, which they kind of push that. We mentioned that in the one video of how, we're sisters for life. They support me no matter what. And being in that group does not necessarily protect against stress, which they kind of allude to, like, it's so supportive, so on and so forth. And lastly, specific subgroup of participants was identified as experiencing significantly higher levels of peer victimization. They were designated as victims. They were more likely to report ethnic minority status, be male, and be a 5th-year college student. I can see that. I want to say I saw a few 5th-year students on their socials. Moreover, these students reported significantly higher levels of stress and lower levels of group identity and campus connectedness. The implications of these findings for university and educational settings are discussed, which I could see they're definitely the victims, or they're like the outsiders, which is unfortunate, to say the least. Where you have all these resources and all these sources, but still, there's someone's like kind of a floater. So here is the intro. Peer victimization involves being on the receiving end of malicious and purposeful aggression perpetrated by a peer. It is a prevalent social problem that has received a great deal of attention during the past 30 years. Peer aggression can include direct or indirect acts. Direct aggression has been defined as physical violence such as hitting, pushing, and tripping, as well as verbal attacks including name-calling, taunting, and threatening. Indirect aggression refers to behaviors that negatively impact a victim's social status and peer relationships. Indirect aggression, often in a way that does not involve direct confrontation. Indirect aggression can include intentional exclusion of the victim from the group, deliberately ignoring the victim, instigating peer conflicts, or spreading rumors. Direct and indirect victimization can occur in cyberspace through technologies such as email, cell phone messaging, social networking websites, chat rooms, and instant messaging. Cyberaggression can incorporate both direct, such as name-calling, humiliation, threats, or intimidation, and indirect forms of aggression, such as masquerading, i.e., pretending to be someone else and posting harmful information, outing, such as sending sensitive, private, or embarrassing information about a victim, and exclusion, such as excluding someone from an online group. In that one video of the Fraternity and Sorority, I did not include her information in that video, but I found a YouTube channel of a sorority member who left her sorority, and that was one of the cyber aggressions that she experienced as the outing. Or not the outing, the exclusion. She found out that she was not part of the chats that she was once a part of, and then she ended up finding out she was no longer about it, and she confronted them, and they were not happy. Let's put it that way. Research indicates that a significant proportion of youth have been victimized by their peers. In national and international studies of middle and high school students, 20% grades 9 through 12 to 34% age 11 through 15 years of youth reporting being the victim of direct aggression. While prevalence rates of indirect peer victimization among youth have been reported to be higher, which makes sense, and that's like the cyber stuff. In a national survey of 1,222 youth, the mean age of 12 years, more than twice as many participants reported involvement in indirect aggression, 71%, as opposed to direct aggression, 33%. The rates of peer victimization via cyber aggression suggest that this phenomenon is also prevalent, with over 30% of 2,186 surveyed middle and high school students self-reporting involvement with cyber aggression. So this is showing how in high school this happens. Okay, she's showing that in high school this happens. So this will also carry over into college years. In addition to significant prevalence rates, researchers have found considerable overlap between different types of peer victimization. For example, Card et al. Found that direct and indirect aggression were significantly correlated, suggesting that the two forms of aggression are different expressions of an underlying aggressive nature, as opposed to being separate entities. In addition, researchers have found a high degree of overlap between students being victimized by aggressive behavior that occurs in physical settings and cyber aggression. This indicates that students who are victimized in one setting likely will be also victimized in the other. Thus, while aggressive behavior can be divided into different forms, these forms are related. So there she shows that it happened in high school, it's more likely going to happen again in college. And I had mentioned previously about, in another video, about Bill Burr, who was talking to, on his podcast, another comedian who had been in a fraternity, I want to say in California. I can't remember exactly where. I want to say USC. And he does talk about this. He says, and I'll put it at the end of this video, he says, you can tell who were the bullies in high school and they got to bully again. And you see those who were bullied and now this is their chance to bully. And then he mentions people like him that just kind of were on the outs of it and just used humor as a way to kind of just stay out of it all. But he did say that he knew other people who would do those type of hazing things and he would not associate them with them anymore. He's like, you expect me to be friends with you when you just did that to someone? But at the same time, you're being a bystander. You're still allowing it to happen by not addressing it. So it's still not okay. And in my opinion, you can tell Bill Burr was kind of like it kind of just gave him the ick a little bit. Effects of peer victimization. In addition to being prevalent, peer victimization negatively affects the youth who are involved with this phenomenon. Research indicates that peer victimization is associated with elevated levels of psychological distress such as anxiety, loneliness, depression, health problems, and even suicidal ideation. And see how here she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sources to support this about the prevalence of peer victimization and how it causes psychological distress, anxiety, loneliness, depression, health problems, even suicide ideation, which is quite a hefty statement. But she is able to say that because she's found 5 references that also say that as well within their research, which is very important with Mr. Brennan and what he is trying to use as an expert witness who is not able to, as Alessi says, tether to his thesis. He was not able to do that. He had sources, but he's like, it may or it may not. Like, that just shows your lack of confidence in your studies. It sounds like someone who was not able to keep their eyes on their own paper. In a study of 6th grade students, found that youth who were victimized by peer aggression displayed elevated levels of depression, social anxiety, and loneliness when compared to their peers, both aggressors and uninvolved students. Moreover, Kalowski and Limber found that victimized students had significantly higher self-report ratings of anxiety and depression. and significantly lower ratings of emotional well-being and academic performance when compared to their non-victimized peers, which makes total sense. You know, they're in fight or flight mode all the time, and when you are in that high cortisol stress, that you're not going to have room or space to focus on anything else, which is very unfortunate, extremely. And then it affects you over time, and it's going to affect them in their college years as well. Peer victimization has also been found to be negatively correlated with self-esteem. Absolutely. In general, self-esteem is also about self-confidence, and they have not been able to build that because they're in the fight or flight mode. In general, victims of peer aggression tend to have a negative view of themselves and their environment. Findings from cross-sectional studies indicate that victims report lower levels of self-concept. Therefore, in light of these findings, peer victimization appears to be deleterious to victims' psychological functioning. So it helps lessen that. Research also indicates that peer victimization is associated with long-term negative effects to psychological functioning. In support of this notion, some studies even indicate that the negative effects of peer victimization can endure into adulthood. In one study, college students who scored in the top 25% on a depression rating scale reported being exposed to higher levels of peer victimization prior to 18 years of age. In addition, college students who reported being victimized in school reported higher levels of current depressive symptoms, anxiety, fear of negative evaluation, and loneliness. Similarly, in a more recent study by Gladstone Parker and Molly, childhood victimization was found to be strongly related to later depression and comorbidities, or comorbid anxiety. Specifically, 25% of adults in an outpatient clinic for depression indicate that they had experienced severe and traumatic episodes of peer victimization in their childhood. So basically, what these victims have experienced in their childhood definitely carries over into their adulthood, and it really affects them throughout their years. It just keeps piling on, it keeps layering, which I just had a little inkling when I was reading all that information about the text messages and the 911 call. And now we know that there were three unknown sources under Maddie's fingernails. That if they were truly there at the time and heard everything that was going on and didn't do anything, which tells me that the perpetrators knew that. Not Brian, because Brian, as a stranger, would not take a risk to do something like that. Even if he has a diagnosis, which that diagnosis of his would, I believe, be more about his interactions with other students at WSU that may go on the witness stand. How he was strange, how his grading techniques. I think that is more of that than anything. But in regards to Bethany and Dylan, those perpetrators knew them and knew that they would not do anything because that's who they are. That's their personality. That's what they have shown, that they're not the ones to intervene when something's going on. They're not the ones to call 911 if something happens. They're kind of just, they don't have that type of self-esteem. And it's possible that those perpetrators knew. But what if Dylan and Bethany are there? Who cares? They're not going to do anything. You know them. Plus, Dylan's always drunk, which she was. And Bethany's on the first floor. She's off and away. Like she won't do anything. She won't say anything. These groups know who their members are. They know how their members act, react. And it reminds me of that video, that TikTok of Maddie had of Dylan, and it was the trend. And that trend was kind of pointing out someone's fashion choices. So they were talking about her Halloween costume. They were making fun of her for that. And she looked upset, and rightfully so. And you kind of see Xana trying to comfort her. Then you see Maddie like jumping on her, trying to cheer her up. And it looks like they're at a fraternity home. You could see their clothes, the hangers. It's like the cement brick walls. You can see like there's a bunk. So she was being picked on, probably by fraternity members, about her Halloween costume. So they kind of know who she is as a person, as well as Bethany. So that's just a thought I had after reading everything. But I don't know if we have all of the text at the same time. It is the state that picked them out, and it's unfortunate you can't trust everything they say or do, or how they conduct their investigation. And it's unfortunate also that many people will believe that everything they say and do is Bible, like it's 100% fact. So let's see here. Similar to internalizing problems such as depression, anxiety, and poor self-esteem. Take a drink here. Peer victimization and elevated levels of externalizing behavioral problems. As a salient example of the former, Sullivan found that peer victimization was related to alcohol use, cigarette use, and aggression in a sample of 8th grade students. Being the victim of either direct or indirect aggression was also correlated with delinquent behaviors such as stealing, damaging property, and skipping school. Therefore, to summarize, peer victimization appears to exert an enduring negative impact on students. Exert an enduring negative impact on students. Psychosocial functioning over time and across multiple domains of functioning. So basically it is multifaceted, multi-layered, and it's not easily undone. It will take time. It will take focus of the why, meaning the victims. Because people have a hard time believing what's happening in front of them. Or, I haven't been bullied. I've been picked on, absolutely. Being a girl, obviously. Girls and girls, this is what we do. We know. Also playing sports. I was pretty good. Not to brag, but I'm a brag. And being young, like being a freshman and being on varsity, I didn't get a lot of warm welcome, so to speak, from several players, especially when I started and they've been on for a while. So I've definitely had some of that. And at first you're just like, what the hell? Like, is this really going on? And then you have to make a choice, either accept it and do something about it, or just kind of be like, oh, hopefully it goes away soon. And that's just being like very just surface on that. But this is something more. It's continuous. This is not just, it is piling on and it just continues. And to the point where you forget of the why. So, peer victimization in college students. The majority of research on peer victimization has focused on children and adolescents in K through 12 school settings, whereas comparably, little research has been conducted on this phenomenon in college students. However, from what research is available, it appears that high rates of college students also are impacted by peer victimization. For example, one study found that 21% of surveyed college students reported being the victim of peer aggression at least once or twice. Similarly, in a survey of 100 undergraduate students, 21% reported having been the victim of cyber aggression, yet over 30% of participants indicated that their first experience of cyber victimization occurred in college. Thus, from the extant research, it seems that peer victimization affects a significant amount of college-aged students, potentially for the first time in their lives. And that makes sense. They were fortunate enough to have a supportive K through 12 years. Thinking of Kaylee and Maddie, very supportive. Kaylee really valued her friendship. She had many different friends from different schools. And now she goes into college, even though many of those students were at her university, not all of them were. And were Kaylee and Maddie, as well as Zaina, experiencing this type of behavior, victimization, for the first time in their college years. It's definitely a possibility. Limitations of research on peer victimization in college students are concerning because these individuals display some unique vulnerabilities. For example, demographic shifts in college students over the past few decades indicate that college students may be exposed to significant adjustment and developmental challenges in addition to the usual stress associated with being in college, such as taking challenging courses, balancing a job, and schoolwork. Research indicates that college students are younger and more ethnically and geographically diverse than they have been in the past 30 years. So, different people from different areas. Being together in one place under a fair amount of stress. In a survey of 364,193 undergraduate students from 613 institutions across the United States and Canada, 30% identified as being an ethnic minority and 46% identified as being a first-generation student, which in, I want to say, Kaylee's sorority, she had at least one of these students where she was a first-generation student. And there was also in some other sororities, and they championed that. They were very proud of that. Moreover, 71% of college students reported being younger than 24 years of age, and students younger than 25 increased by 33% from 1995 to 2006. In addition, college students, particularly college women, are a growing population. Enrollment among women increased 27% from 1997 to 2007. Thus, enrollment of women in college rose 29%, as opposed to an increase of 22% in men. Lastly, 35% of college students reported living on campus, potentially away from the supervision of their immediate caregivers for the first time in their lives. And I want to say in that video with Bill Burr, they mentioned this, or maybe it was a different one I was thinking of, but I also have experienced this too in my university years, that those students who were like the helicopter parents were very much controlled. Now, for the first time, they're not having that, and they go buck wild. They go wild because they never experienced freedom before, and then they just don't know how to handle it. And they didn't realize how stunted they were because everything was done for them, and they were basically not able to even think for themselves. I'm sure the parents thought they were doing the right thing at the right time. I'm not blaming anyone or judging anyone, but that's just what I've witnessed and noticed and observed, as well as other people. It's not that far off. Research indicates that college students present with a range of vulnerabilities that make them particularly vulnerable to being victimized by peer aggression. According to the USDOE 2009, 11% of students enrolled in college in 2008 had a diagnosed disability, 22% of which had a mental health condition. Furthermore, in other studies, even more students have reported symptoms of mental illness that were not recognized as disabilities. Overall, which even just having ADHD is a disability, and that's a real thing, which could also be like, I'm not going any further with that. Over half of a sample of college students have reported experiencing anxiety, depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, or self-injurious behaviors. Now, the self-injurious behaviors, that's something new that I had to learn working in the youth residential facility. And during our trainings, we were all in a group. I was medical, but I was with all the rest, and in the beginning, and someone was brave enough to share their experience of self-harm. And it has a range. It could be like it was just a phase in their life, and this person mentioned it was a phase in their life. And what they would do is they would purposely cut like their leg when they were under amount of stress. They would cut their leg, and just the rubbing of their cut leg onto their jean, that external tactile, help release what was going on the inside. I had one of the youth there. A lot of them had self-harm, and when people hear self-harm, they think suicide, which is not true. The issue is that when you keep doing it and you keep doing it and doing it, it ends up to a point where that could be a potential for that to happen. It can be dangerous because, like anything else, including drugs and alcohol, you need more in order because you build up a tolerance. Kind of the same thing with self-injury, self-harming. So the one youth that was there, they would put scrunchies on their wrist, but the ones with the metal bar, and then they would put their watch on very tight so they felt that pain. And we would have to address that, and I would address it and then let their social worker know, so on and so forth. So they come up with creative ways of self-harming. Consequently, the rate of students who are experiencing mental health problems is growing. Coinciding with this phenomenon, found increases in students' use of college counseling centers over 13-year period of 1988 to 2001 for problems including anxiety, depression, and suicide. In another study, many students reported that their mental health needs did not surface until college. further highlighting the growing mental health needs of college students. And this is what I was kind of like going into, and then I'm like, I'm not going to talk about it. But this is why I was bringing this up, because I read this earlier, but it did not surface into college. Meaning with Brian Koberger, now he's in a teacher's role. So maybe he was able to manage it. And maybe that's even the underlying cause of why he was using illegal substances, because he was not aware of his inabilities. He was self-aware. He could be self-aware enough. He noticed it, but was not able to identify with it. So now he gets some physical fitness. He does his academics. It'll be interesting to see when he was actually evaled. And now he's teaching for the first time. He's been a student the whole time, and now he's teaching and doing a higher level of stress in his studies. So that in managing his disability. And he had a doctor on his college campus. Didn't he go to a doctor's office like a couple days after this happened and had a haircut? So he's responsible in dealing with his disability. So I just don't like that the state is putting this out there and the media is running with it as it's something negative, because that's just only going to further a stigma about mental health and disabilities. It's not helping anyone when you use these aspects to help win a case. It should not just be about winning the case. It should be about getting justice for victims and actually getting the people who did this. We're moving on. Mental health needs and disability status might make college students particularly vulnerable to peer victimization. For instance, the core symptoms of depression include decreased interest or pleasure in activities, as well as social withdrawal. Participating in fewer activities might cause students with higher rates of depression to feel lonely and become socially isolated. Although there are no current studies identifying vulnerability to peer victimization in college students, research with K through 12 students indicates that students with poor emotional adjustment and greater loneliness experienced high rates of victimization. Which makes sense. They definitely become a target to those who know their vulnerabilities. In a 3-year longitudinal study, found that increased rates of anxiety and depression in 7th to 10th grade students predicted being victimized by peer aggression at a later time. Furthermore, students with internalizing distress may have poorer social relationships and feel less peer social support. Absolutely. In a seminal study, found that victims of aggression reported a greater difficulty making friends and had fewer relationships with their peers. And as I'm reading this right now, what's popping in my head is how those officers were talking about Karen Reed in their text messaging. That's what pops in my head. Those types of people, those officers doing this type of aggression and towards her. Obviously, she didn't know what was going on, but that type of aggression that they have towards her just fueled their fire. It just looks like that. In subsequent research, students aged 12 through 18 years who reported feeling rejected at school were found to be 5 times more likely to report being victimized by peer aggression, therefore experiencing emotional distress might render students more susceptible to peer victimization, and peer victimization might then precipitate further emotional distress. Absolutely. It just piles on. To summarize this putative reciprocal relationship, wow, argued that mental health problems may be both a cause and a consequence of peer victimization. Absolutely. Because those who look for that type of vulnerability in their victims, so to speak, they can see, I'm sure we've all experienced it, where we see people who know who to pick on, know who to taunt, know how to press their buttons. And they'll just keep going and going and going. They unfortunately, I hate to say it, but they get a thrill out of it. Peer victimization and fraternity and sorority members. Okay, so she nicely went through, this is what happens when they're in high school. And it's many years of this. And it's also during the years of your developmental years of building your self-esteem, building your self-confidence, learning how to navigate in your school system, your peers, teachers, your studies. And it's a lot. And if you're not able to adjust, it can potentially get worse. And not only that, end up having more issues with your mental health and isolation, so on and so forth. So now here we are in their college years. And let's say some of those students that had that happen to them in high school, well, now, you know what? I'm going to go join a sorority or a fraternity. It's a group, they see what they champion, what they promote, and maybe I'll find my friends here. Maybe this is a group I can identify with. So, and I'm not trying to bash the Greek life. It's kind of hard not to right now, just over the years. And that one video I did with the female who was an alumni, talked about her rush years, just to kind of, that's part of her channel. And she did experience some negative aspects of it. But overall, she had a great experience, but she definitely had some negativity going on with it. And she was an older student. She didn't go to school until she was 21. So she had some of that victimization because of that. And she did talk about that. And she also mentioned she had not the greatest relationship with her boyfriend, and she broke up with him. But she is someone that definitely learned how to adjust. But not everyone does, unfortunately, which is the need for the support groups and counseling of the universities. So, moving on. Sorority and fraternity members, colloquially known as Greek students, are a subset of college students that may be particularly vulnerable to peer aggression and its negative effects. Fraternity and sorority members experience direct peer aggression through hazing. Allen and Madden, 2008, define hazing as any activity expected of someone joining or participating in a group that humiliates, degrades, abuses, or endangers them, regardless of a person's willingness to participate. In a nationwide survey of college students, 73% of students in a fraternity or sorority reported being the victim of at least one hazing incident. In addition, membership in a fraternity or sorority also has been found to predict involvement in hazing. In a sample of college fraternity and sorority members, 53% of respondents reported being the victim of direct hazing-related behaviors, such as participating in a drinking game. 31% reported singing or chanting in public in a situation not related to a game, event, or practice. 26% reported drinking alcohol to the point of getting sick or passing out. 16% reported associating with specific people and not others. 17% reported sleep deprivation. And 18% reported being verbally aggressed by other members. Perhaps most concerning, the author found that 10% of respondents reported performing sex acts with the opposite gender, and 9% reported watching live sex acts. Yikes. And that is also part of grooming when it comes to not just human and sex trafficking, but in children. They found Boy Scouts leaders, youth group leaders, and school teachers. Not so much watching, but part of that, yes, watching. Some of the priests did that with some of the victims, but also just showing pictures of these acts. And they start doing it slowly by just showing them like a nude, and then it progresses. And they do that with kids, teenagers. So when I read that, that's the first thing that came to my head, just learning about sexual offenses in my graduate studies and doing papers on this. So that is very concerning. Contrary to other forms of peer victimization, college students were more likely to report that their hazing experiences were positive. For example, in the study by Allen and Madden, 31% of the 9,067 college respondents reported that being the victim of hazing caused them to feel more like a member of the group. So this is like that trauma bonding. Whereas only 11% of respondents indicated that it made them feel stressed. Moreover, in the same study, 22% reported a sense of accomplishment. 18% felt strong, and 15% reported doing better in class. But the perceived negative effects of hazing were minimal. For example, only 4% of students indicated they felt guilty, and 2% reported feeling like they were in danger. Moreover, students involved in fraternities and sororities expressed a more favorable impression of hazing than their college counterparts did. They viewed hazing as more fun and less harmful than students not involved. So they're minimizing it. It may be that fraternity and sorority members minimize hazing behaviors, or that that they hold different definitions of what constitutes hazing, so their perspective. Thus, participation in hazing appears to foster a mentality that condones hazing as part of the social experiences of members of the Greek system, even though universities continue to say hazing is not acceptable. And even the own sororities and fraternities with their own homes say they don't haze, that it's not, these hands don't haze. But they still do it because it's their perception. It could be their perception of what they think hazing is. Positive perceived effects of hazing could prevent some victims from reporting incidents. Research indicates students did not report being the victim of hazing in 95% of the cases. Moreover, when interviewed, students minimized, rationalized, or normalized their hazing experience. For example, they would report that it was no big deal, no one was harmed, feelings afterward outweighed the pain or stress felt during, or it was tradition, so I didn't mind. In addition to minimizing or rationalizing their experiences, The majority of students did not even define their experiences as hazing. In a nationwide study of college students who reported engaging in behaviors that met the definition of hazing, 9 out of 10 did not consider themselves to have been hazed. And this kind of correlates, I believe, with domestic violence and familial violence. If you're growing up in that type of environment, you think it's normal when it's not. As with domestic violence, the way your partner treats you is because you saw that in your home and you think that's normal. So, however, despite students' tendency to underreport and minimize its effects, hazing significantly threatens students' safety and well-being, and it may even result in death in extreme cases. According to Newer, 23 students died from hazing-related behaviors in 2000, 24 in 2001, and 42 in 2002. See how it escalates? In addition, hazing has been found to result in poor psychosocial outcomes for some victims, such as decreased school attendance, feeling unsafe, and experiencing anxiety and depression. Thus, experiencing hazing can have damaging and dire consequences for some students. And is this possible? A possibility of why Kaylee left school or left 1122 and graduated early? Is this one of the variables? Besides that, she was already driven and a go-getter. Absolutely number one. But with that being said, having that attribute, did she rev up the engine because she just had enough? She wanted out of there. In contrast to other forms of peer victimization, such as bullying that involve repeated incidents of victimization, hazing is a time-limited phenomenon. It only occurs while students are attempting to gain membership into the organization, and it ceases once membership is obtained. I have a question about that, though. I question that. Only because I want to say it keeps going, but not at that high level, but it kind of just it's still there. I don't think it just goes away, is what I'm saying. Thus, it is unclear whether the high rates of hazing within fraternity and sorority groups foster a group mentality that is accepted of peer victimization. Moreover, the prevalence of hazing in fraternity and sorority organizations emphasize the sanctity of group membership. In order to gain access, new recruits must be temporarily victimized by existing members. This heightens the importance of belonging. Consequently, attention that may potentially ostracize one from the group can be especially upsetting. Therefore, college fraternity and sorority members appear to be particularly at risk for increased rates of ongoing peer victimization and elevated levels of stress. This is what I was thinking. I don't think it stops at just that, but it kind of just keeps going in other forms. However, there is very little research examining peer aggression and resulting stress within college fraternity and sorority groups. Studies that have examined ongoing peer victimization in college fraternity and sorority members have yielded mixed results. Smith, Grimm, Lombard, and Wolf, 2012, examined peer victimization, specifically cyber aggression, as it occurred in particular groups of college students such as fraternity and sorority members. Members of these Greek organizations did not report significantly higher rates of being targeted by cyber victimization than did students who were not involved. However, they did report witnessing a significantly higher rate of peer victimization. 51% of fraternity or sorority members compared to 35% of the general college population did not specify who were the victims or aggressors in the scenarios. Yeah, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to say anything. In addition, they did not specify if the reported aggressive behavior occurred within a fraternity or a sorority, between members of sorority fraternities, or between Greek members and other students. So right there is what I was kind of thinking about the in-between groups. Like, they say there isn't any, but they're not going to tell you if there is any, because that's part of being within the group. It's the safety and security of the group, not so much the individual, it's the group. And just something light of this, when I was talking about those who don't keep their eyes on their own paper and have ways of cheating, personally, I just did not like having my power taken away and relying it on the group of the people cheating on the exam. Like, you're giving your power away when you do that. Whereas when you say, you make the conscious decision, like, I'm going to have to learn this material, how am I going to learn it? You're taking your power back and you're building your own power. You're building your identity. It's something as little as that, but it is a big deal. But that is one of those choices that you make when you're learning in school of how do I adjust to be a better student? Because when you're a better student, you become more skillful. Contrary to the findings of Smith, Bauman did find significant differences in the rates of engagement in cyberbullying between members of Greek organizations and their non-affiliated peers. Significantly higher rates of cyber humiliation were found for the group of students who affiliated with a fraternity or sorority compared to non-affiliated college students. In addition, members of fraternities and sororities also reported a significantly greater amount of distress in response to bullying. Therefore, the small amount of research that has been conducted investigating peer victimization suggests that members of fraternity or sorority groups are more susceptible to it, and that victimization causes them a great amount of stress than is experienced by unaffiliated students. However, a lack of research in this area prevents the drawing of any definitive conclusions. I need to get some more water. I'm going to put this on pause and say that after I do my train of thought here. So, this is a great thesis because, yes, there has been a study and they found this, but you can't say this is a definitive conclusion because it's just one study. You need more studies of this specific aspect in order to say, in all of these studies, this says yes. Like when I showed in the beginning how she had in that statement she made, she had 5 different sources, 5 different studies to say, yes, I can feel confident in this statement that I'm making because I have all of these other studies to back me up. So let me go get water and pause this. Okay, I'm back. With that being said, those sources also have to be reliable sources, peer-reviewed, and kind of have the same methodologies like we went over with this one. All right. As implied, research examining peer victimization in college students is limited. What has been published indicates that prevalence rates are similar to those observed in college-age students. In addition, the research on hazing in Greek students is mixed. A significant percent of students do not report negative effects, although they recognize the potential harm. Greek students may be particularly vulnerable to the effects of peer victimization because of the strong emphasis on group membership and social relationships associated with being a member of a fraternity or sorority. However, no theory has been applied to how peer victimization can negatively impact psychosocial functioning. Thus, a theoretically grounded study on this phenomenon is needed. Awesome. This is a great thesis. So chapter 2, you know what? It's an hour and 25. So let's see. Let's just do group identity. So, because I think she does other ones too. So we'll do that, and then the effect of in-group versus out-group, we can do a different time. The campus connectedness. So we'll do a few pages of the group identity because I feel that's important. We've kind of talked about this before. So let's just do a few on this, and then after hearing this, you like to hear more about this and would like for me to continue, I'll be glad to do that. So chapter 2, a theoretical model to explain peer victimization and resulting stress in fraternity and sorority members. One significant limitation to examining peer victimization in college fraternity and sorority members is that no theoretical framework has been applied to understand this phenomenon. However, social identity theory, SIT, could explain the potentially higher incidence of peer victimization within these groups, as well as the exacerbated negative effects on these individuals' psychosocial functioning. Social identity theory invokes the relationship between an individual and his or her group to explain the behavior of group members. According to SIT, individuals have a basic need to obtain a relatively positive view of themselves and their group through comparing themselves to others. Thus, individuals adjust their self-concept and consequently their self-esteem through their affiliation with a chosen group such as fraternity or sorority. Remember, I was talking about giving up your power. You're putting your power into the group. You're identifying with the group. So group identity. Social identity theory posits that an individual attempts to increase his or her own self-esteem and self-concept through identifying with a group. Group identification can therefore be defined as the extent to which an individual believes that he or she embodies group values, characteristics, and attitudes. And this sounds a lot like what we talked about with cults. Individuals can vary on the extent that they identify with members of their in-group. According to SIT, an individual obtains a sense of self-esteem and self-worth through identifying with group members. Therefore, to facilitate group identification, the individual will emphasize the differences between members of his or her group, fraternity or sorority, and outgroups, other fraternity or sorority groups. In addition, according to SIT, members of the in-group would likely view their own group more favorably than they would view members of the outgroups. This phenomenon appears to be particularly relevant to college Greek systems in which social factors related to group membership are especially salient and pronounced. Membership grants students access into a centuries-old group with a unique history. The organization has its own confidential rituals, deep-rooted customs, and a specific rites of passage. Fraternities and sorority groups thus constitute well-established in-group institutions that even appear to be secretive, enigmatic, and insular to outsiders. Tenets of SIT have been supported by studies of college students. In a study by Sedanis, college students who reported higher levels of group identification viewed their group as being more competent than the identified outgroup, such as expressed the belief that members of their in-group were better at the experimental task. They also reported more psychological distance toward members of the outgroup. They were less willing to cooperate with them. This effect also translates into sorority and fraternity membership. In a study of sorority women, level of identification with one's own sorority was related to how members of other sororities were viewed. Ratings of group identification, conceptualized as pride, were related to lower ratings of positive characteristics of other sorority members, such as attractive, confident, friendly, likable, popular, sophisticated, and talented. Thus, the more a sorority member identified with her group and the more pride she had toward it, the less positively she viewed members of other sororities that were perceived to be members of an outgroup. Consequently, SIT suggests that group identity can promote strong identification and potential discrimination and isolation of individuals who are real or perceived to be outsiders. Which is what I was kind of going at with Keely being a former Alpha Phi in a Pi Phi known sorority off-campus home. In accordance with predictions from SIT, researchers have found that school-aged individuals tend to favor their in-group over out-group members when condoning aggressive behavior. Ojala and Nesdale found that boys ages 10 through 13 were more likely to accept peer aggression if it was directed toward an outgroup member. Participants read a scenario that described two characters. One was a member of the Dudes, a group described to encourage reader identification. The Dudes were competitive and liked sports. The other character was a member of the Tryhards, a group designed to be the outgroup. Maybe that's me. I'm one of the Tryhards. Always trying to pass her tests, taking her work seriously. Participants were more likely to retain the aggressor, a member of the Dudes, when members of the outgroup, the Tryhards, were more similar to them. The researchers argued that these findings support SIT. Participants condoned aggression because their group identity, the group's status quo, was threatened when an outgroup member were similar to them. If group members did not feel threatened by outgroup members, they would be less accepting of aggression toward them. The findings of this study also have significant implications for fraternity and sorority students. The threat of similar outgroup members, as predicted by SIT, could lead to significantly elevated levels of peer aggression between fraternity and sorority groups. Many Greek-affiliated students share similar socioeconomic status and ethnicity, specifically at the university where this research was conducted. Administration reported 77% of their Greek-affiliated students to be of Caucasian ethnicity. Therefore, members of another fraternity or sorority could be viewed as especially threatening because of their similarities to members of the in-group aside from the Greek letters that they wear. Moreover, memberships in fraternity and sorority can facilitate in-group mentality in which individuals distance themselves from members of other fraternities and sororities and or non-affiliated peers. This research suggests that the greater an individual identifies with his or her particular fraternity or sorority, the higher likelihood of refusal to cooperate with other Greek affiliated or unaffiliated members. That individual might even be more condoning of aggressive acts toward them. This mentality could lead to increased levels of peer victimization. So after just reading this out loud and thinking about Madison Mogen with the 3 different DNA samples under her fingernails, as we learned with this study, with this thesis, how irrational their behaviors are for their group and how the victimization, peer victimization is still there. What could have Maddie have done to cause such a reaction from them? Like, that's just so weird. It's so strange that how people identify like so strongly with their group like that. That makes them do very irrational things. They take it so seriously, their group identity. Like, I take, my studies and what I do, like my channel seriously, like my work, but I don't take myself that seriously. It's like these types of people take their group identity very seriously to a fault. And it seems as though it just gets enabled because, like we just saw with that study, how every year those hazing incidents increase, how it escalates. Is this a form of escalation of within this Greek system at the University of Idaho? In support of the influence of group identity on peer victimization as implied by SIT, research has highlighted a relationship between the two. In a study conducted by Cassidy, students aged 11 through 15 who identified as being the victim of peer victimization reported significantly reduced levels of social identity compared to their peers. Therefore, students who were victimized reported significant lower levels of identification with a close group of friends, and students who do not report a feeling of social identity are at increased risk of victimization. Similarly, studies of peer aggression in school-age students have revealed relationships between peer victimization, peer rejection, and peer acceptance. Students who are targets of peer aggression experience higher rates of peer rejection and lower ratings of peer acceptance. That makes sense. Consequently, victimization has been correlated with an individual's feelings of identity to his or her group and same-aged peers. Effects of in-group versus out-group victimization. All right. This thesis definitely makes you think about your own personal challenges throughout your school years and high school years and college years. Effects of in-group versus out-group victimization. The tenets of SIT suggest that The relationship between peer victimization and group identity can be particularly moderated by the group from which moderated by the group from which the aggressor is affiliated. Being victimized by members of an outgroup, either another fraternity or sorority or unaffiliated student, might support an individual's negative view of outgroup members, but attributing more negative characteristics to outgroup members. The individual could be consequently elevating the status of his or own group, fraternity or sorority. For example, alphas are so inconsiderate for doing that to me. Members of my own beta would never do such a thing. According to SIT, this might increase the member's feelings of identifying with his or her own fraternity or sorority. Therefore, being victimized by members of an outgroup might increase an individual level of identification with his or her distinct in-group. So it just reinforces it. And at the university I went to that had a strong Greek system, you definitely heard a lot of this. Or not from them so much, but us outsiders had our own thoughts about particular fraternities, ones we liked, ones we didn't like, because they all had distinct characteristics. So I can definitely see us outsiders having that those who are in the inside are definitely going to have that. Conversely, being victimized by a member of one's own sorority or fraternity might decrease an individual's level of group identification. Being victimized by members of one's esteemed group could potentially cause the individual to feel ostracized and isolated. Consequently, the individual might experience less identification with the group. Being victimized by a member of one's own group might not only threaten the individual member, but also negatively affect the impression this person has of the group, sorority, or fraternity. Thus, negative feelings about one's in-group could potentially decrease feelings of group identity. So stress. Social identity theory also predicts the negative psychosocial effects of peer victimization that were identified in a study by Bauman. Greater in-group identification suggests the presence of amplified distress when one's in-group status is threatened. According to SIT, strong identity with one's group is not only a personal belief, but also an important source of self-esteem. Therefore, threats to a member's social status can be particularly devastating. It is hypothesized that peer victimization from outgroup members or anonymous members will still have a positive relationship to psychological stress, but that this effect will not be as pronounced as being victimized by members of one's own sorority or fraternity. So they can get so from an outgroup, if they get victimized by an outgroup, will still have a positive relationship to psychological stress. But this will not be pronounced as being victimized by a member of one's own group. So it happened outside of their group. And they will identify it as, being victimized because it happened on outside their group. But if it happened within their own group, they don't see it as victimized. So campus connectedness. So I kind of basically went over this a little bit about getting support and help. which I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, because I start this video off, and then if I don't like the way it's going, I start all over. But with Stacy Chapin, when she said with Ethan, he went and saw his counselor a lot. He would just drop in to say hello. He had a good relationship with him, which is good that he had his group, Sigma Chi, but he also had someone that he can go to talk with, just to kind of check in with. So let's see here. Conversely, individuals with low levels of social connectedness have been found to be more prone to chronic loneliness, depression, lower self-esteem, higher perceived stress, higher anxiety, more social discomfort, and higher degrees of hostility. So I think I'm going to stop here. It's at 1:45. I'm going to put on afterwards the clip that I mentioned earlier. And if you would like for me to continue, well, you know what? Let's just. Here she shows the model she used, her methodology, her hypothesis. Let's see. And then we have the results. So discussion. I think we got a good understanding of this thesis. Very well written, very well put together. Great methodology, great sources. Has her limitations, which is very important to find in any type of research paper or thesis. They have to know their limitations and how they can help further their research, or where further needs are needed to be met in order to continue the support of their research. Let's see here what the conclusion is. We'll read a little of this, her conclusion. So peer victimization, as it occurs in college fraternity and sorority students, is related to levels of stress, group identity, and overall campus connectedness. These findings partially support SIT as a framework for conceptualizing group identity and peer victimization. They also uniquely contribute to peer victimization literature, emphasizing the need for interventions that focus on helping students feel more connected and socially supported by their university and or school community. And just reading that, I think of Scott Green with Vandal Strong, Vandal Pride, Throw Your V's Up. They really emphasize that connectedness. And why didn't they stop school? Well, students want to be here. They feel connected to our university. They feel very connected to our university. They definitely emphasized that. It'll be interesting to see which students stayed and which students left in regards to that massacre. They also uniquely contribute to peer victimization literature, emphasizing the need for interventions that focus on helping students feel more connected and socially supported by their university and or school community. This study revealed that a majority of college fraternity and sorority students, 58%, have experienced at least one instance of indirect peer victimization since being initiated into their respective organization. Males were likely to experience cyber victimization by members of their own fraternity, and they were more likely to have unaffiliated peers tell other not to associate with them. Collectively, the majority of students reported low levels of peer victimization and high levels of group identity and campus connectedness. However, as hypothesized in the current investigation, peer victimization was significantly and positively correlated with stress, in that higher rates of being victimized were related to higher levels of stress. In addition, feelings of group identity were significantly negatively correlated with within group victimization, also supporting a hypothesized relationship. The more participants were victimized by members of their respective fraternity or sorority, the less they identified as a member of that group. However, group identity was not significantly correlated with being victimized by members outside of one's Greek organization, failing to support the study's hypothesis that there would be a significant and positive correlated between the two. Thus, there were no significant relationship between being victimized by members outside of one's Greek organization and how much they felt like a member of that group. All right. So, group identity negatively correlated with within group victimization. That the more participants who are victimized by members of their respective group, the less they identified as a member of that group. However, group identity was not impacted and correlated with being victimized by members of outside one's group. Okay. Failing to support the study's hypothesis. So, I want to say I said this in the beginning, which I mistook what she was trying to say. Meaning that because of being outside group, it would have the same effect of being victimized than it would with the inside group. When it doesn't have the same weight as being victimized by someone within their own group. So she was thinking with her hypothesis that they would have the same reaction of being victimized by an outside group as they would within their inside group, and it's not the same. I think I'm understanding that correctly. Campus connectedness, or the level of camaraderie one feels with fellow university students, was found to mediate the relationship between peer victimization and stress. In this role, and as predicted, it served as a protective factor against stress resulting from victimization. Alternatively, contrary to predictions, group identity failed to protect against stress. We kind of went through this already in the beginning. All right, so lastly, a specific subgroup. We talked about the victims. Okay, yeah. And that usually their conclusion is kind of what their abstract is, but just has more detail to it. So, there you be. This was a great thesis. Really does a good job explaining, identifying, and backing them up of how you were in high school carries over into college. The importance of needing outside sources of your group, like at the university, to help mediate that through counseling, or having a professor to help you kind of make adjustments within your social circles, and specifically of Greek life, fraternities and sororities. And I was just thinking about with Ethan Chapin, he had a counselor that he would go see. It'll be interesting to see if it increased before November 13th, 2022. That he was reaching out for more assistance because things were going on within his social group, his fraternity, which is interesting that he had a brother, a sibling in the same. So I wonder how that impacted their own personal relationship as well with Maisie. I'm sure they were so close, all three of them. If you ever had friends who were that were twins, they definitely have a particular bond, especially the ones who are identical. The ones that are fraternal, there's some gray area there, but I find the identical ones definitely have more of a bond than those who are fraternal, like Ethan, Maisie, and Hunter. So let me know what you think about this thesis. Did you enjoy it? Let me know what you thought about the findings that I kind of looked at with the 911 calls and with the text. I'll definitely will do more with that, another video. It's probably not going to be, I may do it after I do the connections, dynamics, and timeline. And so instead of doing another video the following week of connections, timeline, and dynamics, I will do the 911, the text with the PCA, and kind of tie those in together and kind of do a timeline with that PCA as well. I'm looking at what they're putting into all those businesses, like surveillance that they used, the banking, some of the like Albertsons, a coffee shop. I already started putting all those on a Google map just to show and to see on an outside view as a Google map view of that. So I started working with that as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope you got some new information, some new insight about not only the fraternities and the sororities in regards to this case, but also yourself. When I was reading that, my own personal adjustments I've had to made with in regards to, taking the time and making a conscious decision, like, okay, I'm going to have to learn how to study, learn how to get this material into my brain so that I can get it out when it's needed as in a test of either the multiple choice or the written work. I always tend to do better with the written work. I always had a hard time with the multiple choice. And a lot of it was just me with focusing. I have a hard time focusing, if you want to know what type of diagnosis I have. And I have that with, at the time where only boys were known, or only boys could be diagnosed with that particular diagnosis of ADD, which I definitely have. I'm sure you probably noticed it in my readings and in how I present things. And I definitely was socially awkward because of that too. Interrupting people, cutting people off, just yelling answers, like impulsive, very impulsive. But I had to learn, and I had to do certain things that have helped me manage it. So that's where sports came along and really helped me manage it. as well as learning how to play an instrument. So that helped me learn how to manage it by just keeping my brain busy and keeping it busy in different ways. So, and then just as well as playing sports and having all that energy to get out and to utilize, I tended to excel in that, and which is a positive thing. And then you had to deal with, okay, this is a positive, great thing, but then people within those groups did not see it as a positive thing because, they wanted what I had and they didn't, which I don't really agree with that because in some aspects, because, I had a natural ability, but I also practiced a lot, and not even when I was at the required time, like I did camps and stuff, because it kept my ADD going. It kept that manageable, but I also enjoyed it. So, I don't like that excuse of, well, they're just better. No, they also work hard at it, which is what I did. So this, I hope, helps, bring in your own times of what you dealt with and how you made adjustments and how that made you to the person you are today. Because I have a feeling that if you listen to this channel and you enjoy these research papers, it's because you had trials and tribulations and you learn how to manage your stress, make adjustments, and deal with your peers and addressing it. So thank you for listening, and I will be doing another video in a few days. I don't know about Sunday, more likely on Monday, possibly Tuesday, depending on how much I get done and how my days go. So I will see you next time. Take care.
I got hit by one of those. I was in a fraternity at USC, and I got hit by one of those. My freshman year, they hired strippers for the Brotherhood night, and it was the first time.
So it must have been beyond homoerotic. That's why I never joined those things.
I made some good buds from it, but I was the comedian. So, like, I am friends with most everybody I went to school with from that.
You just went right by that whole fucking thing.
No, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, the whole Hell Week.
Oh,
Dude,
yeah.
I used to just hear stories, and then we fucking shoved a carrot up his ass. It was like, what?
I will say this. They tried to make a kid at one time. I would get, I'd get baked, and I'd go sit in the back of these meetings that they'd have where they talk about all the kids that rush the house, right? So they'd have all the social chairs up there, and then the president, everyone's sitting, they talk about, they go, all right, Graham Davis, what do we think? Somebody raise their hand. Jeff. Yeah, I hung out with Graham for about 20 minutes at the bar. Super chill, loves tits. So I think we can all agree that we all love tits. And but dude, I talked to her. They started talking to a chick that I was talking to, and not cool. And be like, boo boo, and they go, all right, hey, brothers, please. And he goes, yeah. So I don't know.
Brothers, please.
So that another guy would stand up and go, I also talked to Graham, dude. He has a big heart. Both his mom and dad just died in a Breyer's ice cream truck accident. And I think he was just going through a rough night. And I think he was talking to your chick because her parents also died in a food-related truck accident. So before you judge Graham, let's hear both sides of the story. So I sat in the back, and I go, I also talked to Graham. They go, Adam, and I did this 3 or 4 times. I go, now, look, I know that we're all like, this is what we're doing. We need to figure out who we want, who we don't want. Graham, cool. Like you said, he's going through a lot. Does love tits, which dude, let's fucking go. But he turned around to go to the bathroom, and there was a big black cock on the back of his shoulder. Now, I don't know if that's what went. Half the people starts laughing. I go, I don't know. I'm an actor. I'm in acting school this time. I go, I don't know if that's what we want, but I'm just saying. They go, hey, Ray. They call me hey, Ray. They go, shut up. All right, what else? All right, Matt Thompson. Matt. Somebody stands up. Dude, Matt, same thing. Matt, big heart, whatever. Somebody else combats that. Dude, I went to the high school he went to as a kid in Detroit. He was a fucking chode. Adam. So Matt, I also talked to him for a bit. He actually came up to me and said, I saw you eyeing those meatballs. Did you want me to grab you one? Generous guy, loves tits. Again, we're pumped on that. But he turned around to go talk to another brother, and it's a big black cock, dude, right on the back. They go, dude, what the fuck? And I go, I'm just saying, is this who we want in our house? I'm just saying, is this all right? I thought that's what we were doing, is trying to figure out who we want. I did it 2 more times, and they kicked me out. And I stood up, and Jerry Maguire, and I stand up, and I go.
Kicked you out of the frat house?
No, of the meeting. I stood up, and they go. I did, because I did it one more time. And when I raised it was 3. I mean, the timing of this, it was fucking rule of threes. 2 more guys, and then I raised my hand, and everyone's laughing now at this point. So I raised my hand. I mean, you got 100 plus guys. You know, I mean, I'm fucking always trying to perform. Raised my hand, and they was laughing, and the head of the social chair goes, "Hey, Ray, if you're gonna fuck around, dude, please don't talk." I go, I want to talk about Eli Donovan. Vic, can I say something? Am I not a member of the house? I'm like, I'm at full acting. And he goes, all right. I go, talking to him, sweet guy, loves tits. I get some laughs. I go, but dude, I turn around and they go, get the fuck out. I go, big black cock. I'm just saying, what are we doing? And then I stand up and I go, they kick me out and I go, all I'm saying is, who's coming with me? I go, I'm going to go to my room and smoke some weed. Who's coming with me? And do the fucking Jerry Maguire. And about 4 potheads stand up. And we're all just sitting there. And then, but I would do silly shit. And so there were some guys, though, I was building to this one had a lineup, and I went in to watch just because socially it was wild. I mean, I never hazed anybody. I did, silly shit. I pretended to be a brother from like Chico State, put on a wig, went up and down, had a British accent, and would ask them, does anyone know, the Fruity Pebbles theme song and whatever. And right after a guy that was like, apparently this guy was talking to a girl I like. What the fuck? I mean, some of that shit was just true guys that were bullied and now they're taking it out, or guys that are just bad guys. And I went through that, and they tried to be friends with me after, and I was just like, I'm good. Like, you don't get to do that and then just do this.
That's what I never understood about that.
But there's a lot of,
the Hell Week. It's just like,
totally, it's unnecessary.
You're gonna do all that shit, then I'm gonna hang out with you. It's like I'm gonna beat the fuck out of you.
Totally.
Or try.
Totally.
Or just not hang out with you.
Not hang out with you.
I never understood.
But there were enough. I went through a time where there were enough guys that were not. The hazing wasn't dumb shit. It was like we took a trip to Vegas last minute. They like woke us all up or said, everybody meet here like midnight, and we drove in 4 cars to Vegas and stayed up all night to do a scavenger hunt. While the other guys that went with us went out and gambled and whatever, and it was like a bonding thing. You walk up and down the strip, go to this place, get a matchbook, get a picture in a fountain, get a picture with a stripper, right? And that was wild and fun and whatever. And some guys in the house that had tons of money broke away and were betting, ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, I didn't know. I parked my grandparents' Mercury Grand Marquis on the Fraternity Row at USC amongst like Escalades and BMWs. Every weekend people were like, whose grandparents are here to visit? I'm like, oh no, that's just the car I got because,
Dude, that's a great car.
I loved it, dude. It was a big clap.